Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at one of the latest and greatest from MSI. This is the B650 Edge Wifi. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we're taking a look at the MSI MPG B650 Edge Wifi. This is an AM5 board with the B650 chipset, if you've probably not guessed that already. And this is what would technically be an upgrade over the B650 Tomahawk board. If you're potentially looking at that and you're kind of comparing models and you're looking to see which is going to be best for you, then this potentially might be on the list due to some slight differences in actually how the PCI Express bus works, also some of the additions such as PCI Express Gen 5 for your primary M.2 slot, which some people in the previous videos have mentioned and said they would prefer that rather than being PCI Express Gen 4, so a little bit more longevity as things go along. But certainly this potentially is a great replacement, and actually for me it is, because I've actually sent my Tomahawk board back and managed to get this one for about £30 more, which I feel was actually a pretty good investment. We do have a few extra niceties on here, such as we have more M.2 shields. We've also got a little bit of RGB built into the board, which may or may not be your thing, but certainly for some people it may be one of those differentiating factors which will push you towards one board or another. So on the video we're going to go through, this isn't a review as such, this is just an unboxing and go through some of the feature set. There will be updated videos on this, such as how to flash the BIOS, a BIOS tour, and also there will be update videos as well, as this is going to be pretty much my daily driver for our streaming PC, which is normally behind us, which I've had to swap out temporarily, just so we've got something there up and running and actually lit up. Anyway, I digress. So this is an unboxing and basically an overview. So that is where we'll start. So obviously this is the board itself, which we'll go through in more depth, but let's take a look inside the packaging and see what we get and take a look at the packaging itself. So MSI, very typical packaging these days. They seem to be going with this design trend. As you can see, MPG B650 Edge Wi-Fi, AM5 Motherboard, B650 chipset for socket AM5, PCI Express Gen 4, DDR5 support and overclocking supported, etc. And also it has Lightning Gen 5 support for our M.2 drive. On the back of the box, go over some of the key features. So we do have a 17-phase VRM, which is their kind of duet system. So we've got 7 phases, which are doubled, which gives you the 14 plus 2 plus 1 for other aspects of the VRM, all with 80 amp stages as well. So potentially you can pump through an absolute ton of juice through this thing, depending on the processor, although the way things are heading, it seems, with AM5 processors, especially with Vcache, we're using less and less power, so massive VRMs may not be entirely necessary, but again, it's nice to have it there for those efficiency tasks. Also, you've got Lightning Gen 5, as we said, M.2 Shield Frozzer, so this is something which is an upgrade over the Tomahawk board and some of the other boards, such as the -P or -P. You do have full support for M.2 shields across the entire motherboard, so there's no empty slots in that regard, so that's good. Wi-Fi 6E, so the latest and greatest in terms of Wi-Fi connectivity, and also support for Bluetooth 5.2 and 5.3. There's 2 versions of this board, version 1.1 and 1.2. 1.2 will have a slightly upgraded M.2 port for the Wi-Fi, and also will support Bluetooth 5.3 rather than 5.2, but it's kind of very negligible differences between the two. Still supports low energy Bluetooth, etc. Premium thermal design, basically because it's so heavy, there's just a ton of metal there, dissipating heat. Latest support for DDR5 memory, anything up to DDR5 6600 MHz, and potentially that will go up and increase as BIOS releases come out. Audio Boost 5, and also you've got 2.5 gig LAN on here as well, which is something of almost like a standard feature these days for AM5 boards, but certainly it's nice to see it, and if you've got a router, switch, etc. which supports it, then you can get some pretty stellar speeds out of it. Over on the side of the box there, you can see some of the specifications, so I'll put those on the screen so you can have a read through there. I suggest to pause it if you want to have a look in more depth. And also there is a picture of the I/O overview, which we'll go over as well, but again, if you want to pause it and take a longer look at it, you certainly can do. Looking inside the box, it's a relatively meagre affair. There isn't a lot in here. Obviously there isn't a motherboard now because we've already taken that out. Get rid of some of this cardboard packaging and you get the usual stuff. So if you're in the EU, you'll get your regulatory notices. There's also a quick start guide, which you probably will need the QR code because there isn't an instruction manual or anything like that here. That is one of those things which is now gone, so it's all down to PDFs, etc. Which actually I think is a bit of a pain, because there's probably going to be some of you out there who this is going to be your primary PC. So how do you access a PDF if you don't have a PC? They're assuming you have a phone and you don't mind scanning QR codes. So yeah, I'd much rather prefer to have an owner's manual, and it's always one of those things you can take for a read on the toilet. Talking of going to the toilet, you also get these MSI badges, which you may or may not like. Personally, I think these are a little bit superfluous, which is quite a big word. If you want to use them, you can do. I think most people will probably just stick them straight back in the box. Something else you might want to throw straight back in the box as well is your SATA cables. So you get a pair of SATA cables, one straight, one with right-angled connector. You also get a pair of antennae for connecting up your Wi-Fi, etc., and obviously Bluetooth antenna, that sort of stuff. And you get a couple of M.2 lockers. So this is MSI's kind of slightly patented device for securing your M.2 drives in a kind of slightly more easy fashion, but it's not quite that easy, as we'll see later on in the video. Right, so that is the unboxing done. Let's take a look at the board itself. And the first thing you're going to notice is when you take it out of the box, which actually you're finding with a lot of motherboards these days, but this thing is really, really heavy. You've got some super chunky heat sinks here, especially this big one here. This is just a really big, solid chunk of metal. I haven't actually weighed it, but I'm guessing it's got to be, well, it's heavy, put it that way. And the one at the top here, very heavy indeed. I personally like the design of this. I think it looks really nice. So you've got the black PCB, which is always a good thing to see. And also you've got these other accent colors of the silver, chrome, etc. And also you've got some white on there as well. So it should tie in pretty much with most builds, whether you're going for a black theme, a white theme, a chrome theme, whatever. It's got all the kind of accents there, so it should tie in. Something else which you may or may not like is the fact there are some slight red highlights as well, which I guess is down to MSI's branding to some extent, and also the Edge kind of designation. So you do have a little bit of red on there as well, which actually works out well for me because I'll be using AM5 socket, retention socket thing, which is red as well. So another little nod in the right direction for my particular build, but it may or may not suit you. So going around the board itself, on the top, connection-wise, you've got two 8-pin connectors. You don't have to use them both at the same time. You can just get away with a single 8-pin connector. I do get asked that quite a lot. Yeah, if you want to connect them up, if your power supply has the additional cables there, then sure, go ahead, put it in there. It won't do any harm. Certainly, that is really more for kind of serious overclocking and maybe the upper echelon of the multi-core processors. But in general, even with a 7950, you don't really need that extra connector. So heat sinks all around there as well. Again, you've got RGB logo there, which hopefully you're going to be seeing from some footage after I put this together. So I'll try and incorporate that so you can see what that's like. Obviously, with the RGB, you can turn it on, turn it off. The choice is yours. You can control it either from the motherboard, or you can actually disable it. There is a switch on the bottom, so you just turn that switch and it disables all your RGB. So for purists, you may want to do that. And of course, you can control everything in the MSI Center, which is, I think, is actually one of the better pieces of software on the market at the moment. But everyone has their own opinion on that. So let's look at the rest of the connectivity. So obviously in the middle, you've got our AM5 socket. There is a socket protector on there. Do keep hold of that. If you lose it or anything, you try and send the board back. Most manufacturers now, with the kind of LGA boards, won't allow an LRMA without a socket protector on there. So do keep hold of that. It's got the new AM5 socket retention mechanism. So again, a bit of a step up from AM4 if you're used to that. Although it does have the standard kind of AM4 stroke AM5 retention modules there, so certain coolers which worked with AM4 will also work with AM5. Obviously do check your cooler in advance. Moving across, so we've got an absolute ton of actual headers here for fans, water pumps, all that kind of stuff. So the CPU one is kind of hidden away slightly just here. Above that there is a pump header, so that is going to be suitable for water cooling, etc. Although again, in the BIOS or MSI Center you can configure that to do either PWM, DC or automatic. So you can configure those exactly how you want to. Next up, there is our first chassis fan header, of which there are 6 in total. So 6 chassis fan headers, also a CPU header and a pump header, so giving you 8 PWM type connectors in total for those that are wondering. Next up, we've got some other connectors there. So you've got your RGB connector. There's another one next to it, which is not a relevant one. It's for other MSI stuff, so you can ignore that. It's not for users. But you've got a 12 volt 4-pin RGB there. Next up, we've got a 5 volt 3-pin digital RGB, so for your kind of more modern cases, that kind of stuff, that's going to be fine. The top one really is kind of something legacy really for older AM4 coolers, which had the Spire RGB, that kind of thing, or Wraith RGB, whichever it was. So 12 volt stuff you still can connect if you want to. Got 4 RAM slots, So that is going to support up to, technically it's 128 gigabytes of RAM. This will run better with single rank RAM. You will get better frequency out of it. Do check the MSI website. But yeah, if you're looking for the higher frequency RAM, single rank is going to do better for you. So bear that in mind before you make your RAM purchases. Underneath that, the savior of modern computing, we have the MSI debug LEDs. So there's 4 LEDs there, which go through a boot cycle. So first one is CPU, then you've got RAM, then you've got VGA, then you've got boot. If the LED gets stuck on any one of those LEDs, then there is a problem potentially, or something which needs addressing. If it flashes with the CPU, or if the CPU one is illuminated, it means your motherboard needs a BIOS update to recognize your processor. If it's stuck on RAM, it means your RAM sticks are either not compatible, not seated correctly, or they're trying to run it at XMP frequency or a EXPO frequency higher than is actually rated or supported by your particular setup. If it stops on VGA, it means your graphics card's got a problem, etc, etc. You get the general idea. So that is very handy for diagnostic purposes. Obviously, if you're not entirely sure, we do have a Discord, so you can join us for that, and we can try and help you out with those types of problems. Next up, another PWM header. So that's, again, pretty decent place for it to be. 24-pin power connector, no surprises there, does exactly what it needs to do. You have a USB Type-C front panel header there. Always nice to see one of those on a motherboard, although realistically, for a motherboard of this class and price, you kind of expect it to be there, but it's good that it's there anyway. Moving down, we've got 4 SATA ports there, so that is regular SATA ports. You can support RAID on those. Just on those 4, the bottom 2 aren't included in the RAID because they're run from a different subsystem. We've also got a USB 3 front panel header connector there as well, and another fan header. Nice place, obviously one at the top, one at the bottom, quite handy to have. There's also in there a tiny little 5-volt addressable RGB connector. Then you've got your front panel connectors, so you've got the main block there of 8, and you've got the extra block of 4 there, so that's for your speaker, so you can plug a speaker in to get BIOS bleeps, that kind of stuff. Another 2 SATA ports there, so you can have up to 6 drives in total. Next up, USB 2.0 header, and there's another one on the other side of that capacitor. Just above there, you've got your JBAT1, which is your reset CMOS, so if you ever need to rectify any settings, you've maybe overindulged in some overclocking or your XMP or EXPO settings, then you can use that to reset the BIOS, etc. Moving across, another 2 fan headers. Then also we've got things like the Thunderbolt connector and other outputs at the bottom. You've got the LED switch, as we said earlier, so if you're not into RGB, you can just flick the switch and it turns off all the RGB on the board, which may be beneficial to some people. Moving across from that, so we've got some more custom headers there as well. Front panel opening, all that kind of stuff. And then there is the JRGB, so you've got another 12-volt RGB, not addressable, 12 volts. And then you have the front panel audio connector for the onboard audio, and you've got a isolation track there. So actually on this ALC 4080 audio chip, pretty decent actually. I've used this on a couple of boards now. I'm very impressed. The sound quality is excellent, works very well, and yeah, I've no complaints about that whatsoever. So if you're looking for decent audio, yes, it has got decent audio built in. Moving back up, so we've got our M.2 slots here. Now both of these are powered from the chipset, the B650 chipset, so they are kind of separate, as is this slot on the bottom here. So depending what you want to do, and also that slot on the bottom, those are all kind of chipset powered. There are going to be some limitations, as there is with pretty much all B650 motherboards. Because there's only a certain amount of lanes and bifurcation, etc., the more things you plug in, the worse things get in general. Now, if you're just using a graphics card, PCI Express Gen 4x16, and your top M.2 slot, you've got no worries whatsoever. Everything is going to work exactly as intended. But if you start populating your lower M.2 slots, then that is when things start getting a little bit tricky. You will find then that this lower slot, which is a PCI Express Gen 4x2, will actually reduce itself down to kind of half the speed if you're using the M.2 on this side, so M.2-3 they call it. If you're using M.2-2, that's going to be fine. That's going to be running at PCI Express Gen 4x2 also. So that kind of extra PCI Express Gen 4x4 is divided between that slot and that slot. Hopefully that makes sense. Obviously, PCI Express Gen 4x16 slot there. There is also the PCI Express Gen 1 slot at the bottom there, should you want to use it. Kind of most people, I guess, if you're going to be using the bottom slot, it isn't going to be for a graphics card these days. It's going to be something like a capture card. So for me personally, it's going to be the Elgato Camlink Pro, which is PCI Express Gen 3 times 1, I think it is. So plugging that in there is going to be absolutely fine. It's going to have no detrimental effect on the rest of the system. And realistically, I've actually had this question a number of times. Mike, if I plug in all the M.2 slots, am I going to notice my system getting a lot slower? Realistically, no. If you're running benchmarks, yes, you will see differences in the performance. But realistically, most graphics cards, unless you're going for the very, very high end, they don't saturate the buses enough to warrant it being a major issue. Although there are going to be some graphics cards which, if they're already cut down in their bus already, cutting it down even further may be more detrimental than others. But again, it's all about that kind of balancing act of getting the right parts for the right motherboard, which obviously, again, if you're not too sure, reach out to us. We'll give you as much help as we possibly can. So in between that, BIOS battery, so a bit of a pain in the ass being there, because if your graphics card is there and you want to reset the BIOS and it's not doing it from the bottom there, you have to take the graphics card out to get the BIOS battery out. That I would have preferred to have seen being somewhere else, but there's not really many other places it can go, so I guess it is what it is. There's also another fan header here tucked away, so if you're using a rear fan in your setup, you can plug one in there directly. And also there is a TPM header, should you want to use one, just there. Realistically, most people use the built-in TPM or the FTPM built into the processor, so that's kind of redundant really, but it's there should you want to use it for certain business tasks, etc. Other than that, I think that is pretty much it. We covered pretty much all the bases. These panels are all removable for the M.2 drives. There's probably been some B-roll you've seen of that already. They're using plastic clips, so you don't need to even get a screwdriver. Once you've taken that off, you can just use the plastic clips to actually secure your drives. They're set up as default for the 2280 size drives, which are pretty much the most popular ones on the market now. And actually something of interest for the PCI Express Gen 5 slot, because we know those PCI Express Gen 5 drives are going to get a little toasty. They've gone ahead and actually put 2 lots of cooling. So this is a dual frozzer or freezer, whatever they want to call it. So you actually got a kind of metal pad underneath and above, and also there are thermal pads which will transfer the heat to both front and back. Obviously, depending on your drive, where the RAM is or the controllers, etc., you may or may not need to use it, but I would suggest taking the peeling off anyway. It does say to remove it, so a little bit extra cooling can't do any harm. Moving around to the back of the board, which, yeah, not very exciting. You've got your traditional keep out zones there, so make sure there's no pins going anywhere near there. Realistically, that means like if you're installing an ATX board and you've got your motherboard pillars in the micro ATX positions, move them, because otherwise it's going to be bad. Generally very bad. Don't do it. It's not good. You've got screws there to remove the heatsink should you want to, and on the back you can see we've got this massive plate on here for the AM5 socket retention, which is why we don't get the bending on these. So with Intel chips, because they don't have such a substantial mount there, and also because they're a more elongated chip, you do potentially get the issues with the actual sockets or the processor kind of bending under the pressure. But with this, it's so solid, then isn't so much of a big deal. What is a big deal, however, is the I/O on this thing. This thing has got an absolute metric ton of I/O, which I really like, although it's not laid out in a particularly beneficial way, which those of you that have bought one of these boards or a similar board previously will know exactly what I mean. And that is for where the antennas are. For me personally, I'm of the opinion the antennas should be at the very top. So when you've got the antennas in their normal position, which is generally in the vertical, so those are going to be vertical, they're going to be blocking all of your ports, which is just one of those things. A lot of manufacturers do it. There's one or two recently I've seen where they have moved to the top, which I do applaud them for that. Although in this particular instance, we do have our BIOS flashback button here. So as with pretty much every AM5 motherboard on the market so far, that is one of the kind of things which has been built in and will be on all boards. We'll do some BIOS update videos on this. You can see how it all works. It's very straightforward. Download the BIOS onto a USB stick, rename it, put it in, press the button, flash the BIOS, and yeah, you're good to go. So always good to see a BIOS flashback button, although it is pretty much becoming a kind of mainstream thing now. Next up, we've got our DisplayPort and HDMI ports. Now, depending on what processor you're putting on here, you will have various levels of support. The base level AM5 processors currently all have a built-in very basic Radeon Pro graphics, or whatever they call it. So you can get a basic display out there, 4K 60Hz, no problem. There will be new APUs coming out shortly, which will take advantage of some of the extra features in these ports. But being as they're not on the market yet, it seems kind of irrelevant to discuss it, but maybe we'll do a follow-up when those processors actually hit the market. Next up, we've got our 2.5 gig LAN, which supports gigabit and 10100 if you want to use that as well. So nice to see that. That is a Realtek chipset on there, RTL8125. We've also got some USB 3.0 ports there. So these are your super speed ports. So these are 10 gigabit per second, the red ones, and the USB Type-C is a 20 gigabit per second. So that's a super speed one. Above that, you've got a couple of standard USB 2.0 ports, which is always quite handy to have. And underneath that, we've got a full complement of 4 USB 3 ports. Those are going to be your typical 5 gigabit per second ones, so nice to have that. In total there, you have got, what's that, 10 USB ports. I think that should be enough for most people. You've got your antenna connectors there on a typical SMA, just screw-ons. You can replace those if you want to. If you don't like those, just replace with different or better antennas. And after that, you've got your audio setup. So this supports the ALC 4080 chipset, which has got 7.1 audio. You've also got SpeedIF. The red one in the middle there, that is for your speaker output. That one's your microphone. They're all labeled up, but yeah, the red one is basically your output to plug into your monitor or your headphones, etc. when you need to. So overall, I think it's a very nice design, and I like the fact that with the IO shield, they've actually kind of taken the design from the front here, this kind of silvery grey, and transferred it onto the back. And it does kind of go quite white in some light, so if you're doing a white build, then it's not going to look totally out of place. So there you go, that is a tour of the board overall and some of the specifications. If there's anything which hasn't been entirely clear to you, please do reach out to us in the comment section below. I'll try and answer questions as best I can. Like I said, we will be doing follow-up videos on this, doing things like the BIOS update and also BIOS tour, doing some tuning with our AM5 system. And also, again, it will be a longevity report as we go on, because this is going to be in our stream PC, which we use every Saturday night to do a stream at 8 o'clock UK time. So if you want to join us for that, you're more than welcome to do so. And like I said, if you want to ask any questions about this particular board, then please do reach out to us in the comment section below. But I think that's going to wrap things up. I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.